It all started one Friday evening when Jessica, my wife, stood in our kitchen, keys already in hand, telling me she was going to a party. This wasn't just any party, it was one I had specifically told her I wasn't comfortable with, given the crowd and rumors I'd heard. Normally, we'd talk things through, but that day, she looked right through me, as if my opinion didn't matter. Her cold smile and dismissive tone felt like a slap in the face. "Don't wait up," she said before walking out the door, wearing a dress that clung to her in a way that sent alarms ringing in my head. It wasn't her usual style, it was the kind of outfit meant to turn heads, to capture attention. Not just any attention. I knew something was wrong, but I swallowed my words and let her go. The house felt eerily empty that night, the silence pressing in around me. I tried distracting myself, flipping through channels on the TV, but my thoughts kept wandering back to Jessica. She'd been acting distant for weeks, the warmth between us fading like a light slowly dimming. At first, I chalked it up to stress, work, life, the usual pressures. But this felt different. There was a new edge to her voice, an indifference that cut deep. I found myself replaying every conversation from the past month, every time she had come home late or been cagey about her whereabouts. Those explanations, which had once felt plausible, now seemed rehearsed, like she had been practicing them just for me. My gut twisted with suspicion, but I still didn't want to believe it. I resisted the urge to call her, to check in and see what she was doing. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but the thought gnawed at me, making it impossible to sit still. The minutes dragged by, each one pulling me further into a dark, unsettling place. Midnight came and went, and still no word from Jessica. That's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked our phone records. It took a few taps, and there it was. A number I didn't recognize. Dozens of texts, late-night calls, too frequent, too intimate for it to be nothing. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the evidence, feeling sick to my stomach. Maybe it was work-related, maybe a friend I didn't know about. But deep down, I knew better. The pattern was too clear, too obvious to ignore. I stayed up all night, pacing the house, waiting for her to come home. Every sound from outside made my heart race, but none of them were hers. By dawn, I was sitting on the couch, eyes heavy with exhaustion, when I finally heard her car pull up. The front door opened slowly, and Jessica stepped inside, her hair slightly messy, makeup smudged, reeking of alcohol and perfume. She didn't even flinch when she saw me sitting there, just gave me that lazy, detached smile like nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said, as if she hadn't just stayed out all night without a single word. I could feel my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. Jessica's expression shifted slightly, but she kept her cool. "At the party, I told you," she replied, brushing past me toward the kitchen. I stood up, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Who's the guy?" She froze. It was only for a second, but I saw it, a flicker of panic in her eyes before she quickly composed herself. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "Don't lie to me," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I saw the phone records. All those late-night calls, the texts. I know there's someone else." Her face went pale, but she still tried to play it off, shaking her head as if I was being ridiculous. "You're paranoid," she snapped, but there was a crack in her voice now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "No, Jessica," I said, stepping closer. "You've been distant for weeks. The lies, the late nights. I'm not stupid." For the first time, she didn't have a response. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. That silence was louder than any argument we'd ever had. It confirmed everything. Jessica stood there, frozen, the silence between us thick with tension. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to come up with an excuse, a way to twist the situation in her favor, but nothing came. My stomach churned as the reality of it all settled in. This wasn't a misunderstanding or paranoia on my part. She had been hiding something from me, and now the walls were closing in. I asked you a question, I said, my voice low and steady, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. Who is he? She turned away from me, running a hand through her messy hair. It's not what you think, she mumbled, her back still facing me. You're blowing this way out of proportion, Jack. Out of proportion? I could feel the anger rising again, but I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. Do you even hear yourself? You disappear all night, I find months of calls and texts with some mystery number, and you're telling me I'm overreacting? She spun around, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. Yes, Jack, you are. I went to a party. I had a few drinks. You're making it sound like. Like what? That you're cheating on me? The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Her eyes flicked toward the floor, avoiding mine. That moment of hesitation, of weakness, was all I needed. She didn't deny it. She didn't rush to explain or apologize. Instead, she just stood there, chewing her lip, as if she was considering her next move. I didn't want to hurt you, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. It was weak, pathetic. A hollow excuse. I laughed bitterly. Hurt me? Jessica, you've been lying to me for God knows how long. You've been sneaking around, calling and texting someone behind my back. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice? I didn't plan this, Jack, she said, her voice rising with frustration. It just happened. Things between us haven't been good for a while, and I. So it's my fault? I snapped, cutting her off. You think because we've had a few arguments, that gives you a free pass to go, Anne. It's not like that, she shouted, her face twisting in frustration. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying. I don't know. I don't know how we got here. She looked at me then, for the first time with real emotion, and I could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't just trying to deflect anymore. There was guilt in her eyes, a sadness that she couldn't fully hide. But it wasn't enough. I shook my head, stepping back, trying to make sense of it all. Who is he? I repeated, quieter this time, the words feeling heavier with every passing second. How long, Jessica? How long has this been going on? She hesitated again, her hands trembling at her sides. A few months, she finally admitted, her voice small, almost childlike. We met at work. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. It was just an escape. An escape. That word hit me harder than any confession she could have made. An escape from what? From me? From our life together? The life we had built over the years? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, as if everything I had thought was stable and certain was now crumbling beneath my feet. And what now? I asked, my voice strained. Were you just going to keep lying to me? Keep sneaking around until, what? You got tired of me? Until I found out like this? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered. I didn't. I don't know how to fix this. Her tears didn't move me. Not anymore. They were too little, too late. You don't know how to fix this? I repeated, my voice cold. Jessica, you broke us. You've been breaking us for months, and I didn't even realize it. She flinched at that, and I could see the weight of her actions crashing down on her. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, watching her crumble under the guilt and shame. But then I remembered the texts, the late-night calls, the lies. She didn't deserve my pity. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Jack. Sorry? I shook my head in disbelief. That's all you've got? Sorry? Do you even understand what you've done? I know, she sobbed, her tears flowing freely now. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I didn't know how to stop. I was so unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix it. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. Unhappy? I spat, my voice shaking. So this is my fault? You're saying you were so unhappy that you had to run off and find someone else? She shook her head, wiping her face with her hands. No, it's not your fault. I'm not saying that. I felt trapped, Jack. I felt like we were stuck, like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to get back to where we used to be. I stared at her, my mind reeling from everything she was saying. The excuses, the justifications, none of it mattered anymore. She had made her choice. She had betrayed me, betrayed us, and there was no going back from that. I need you to leave, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica's eyes widened in shock. Jack, please. No, I said firmly, stepping back. I need you to leave. I can't look at you right now. I can't do this. She hesitated, her lip trembling, but she didn't argue. She knew this was the end, at least for now. Without another word, she turned and headed for the door, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The door clicked shut behind her, and I was left standing there, alone, in the wreckage of everything we had once built. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the door, feeling the weight of it all crashing down on me. The betrayal, the lies, the realization that the woman I thought I knew was now a stranger to me. There was no going back. Not after this. As the door clicked shut behind Jessica, I stood there in the stillness, the sound of her footsteps fading away. The weight of everything hit me like a freight train, years of trust, love, and commitment shattered in a single night. My mind was spinning, consumed with a storm of emotions, disbelief, betrayal, anger. But as the anger grew, it began to harden into something darker. Something more focused. Revenge. I slumped down onto the couch, running my hands through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. What she had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. And that realization brought a sickening clarity. She had been playing me, lying to my face while carrying on with someone else. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't walk away, pretending everything would be fine. She needed to feel the same pain, the same gut-wrenching devastation she had caused me. But I wasn't just going to lash out in some reckless outburst. No, that wouldn't satisfy me. I wanted something more. Something that would cut her as deeply as she had cut me. I was going to take my time, plan this out carefully, methodically. I wanted her to realize what she had lost, to suffer through the slow, agonizing collapse of her life. And I would make sure her lover paid too. Whoever he was, he wasn't going to walk away unscathed. I grabbed my phone, staring at the blank screen for a moment, the weight of my decision sinking in. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me, but I knew I couldn't act impulsively. I needed to know more. First, I had to find out who this guy was. I had some clues, those late-night calls and texts, the number I didn't recognize. If Jessica thought she was being smart, she hadn't counted on how far I was willing to go. I logged into our shared phone plan again, scrolling through the history of calls and messages until I found the number that had been haunting me. The one she'd been texting late into the night while I lay next to her, oblivious to her lies. It was time to dig deeper. I copied the number and plugged it into an online search. Nothing came up immediately, just a generic result. But I wasn't done. I used a reverse lookup service, something I'd read about in passing, and after a few minutes of searching, I had a name. Brian. Brian Evans. It wasn't a name I recognized, but now that I had it, I could do more. I leaned back, my mind whirring as I considered my next steps. I didn't just want to confront him. I wanted to make him feel the same kind of helplessness and humiliation that I had felt tonight. But first, I needed more information. Where he worked, what kind of life he led, and how best to dismantle it piece by piece. I knew Jessica wouldn't be coming home for a while. I'd made it clear she wasn't welcome tonight, and honestly, that was for the best. I needed space to think. To plan. I started digging through social media, tracking down this Brian Evans. Within minutes, I found him. His profile popped up, public enough for me to see his photos, his job, and even his posts. He worked in real estate, a well-dressed, cocky-looking guy in his early 30s. His profile was filled with smiling pictures, expensive dinners, luxury cars, vacation spots. The kind of lifestyle that would have appealed to Jessica. Seeing his smug face made my blood boil, but I wasn't ready to blow up just yet. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing I was onto him. No, I needed to bide my time and strike when it would hurt the most. I spent hours that night scrolling through his life, piecing together who this guy really was. He wasn't married, no surprise there, but he had a reputation. In the comments on his posts, there were subtle hints, jokes from his friends about his playboy ways, his habit of getting what he wants. I clenched my fists as I read the comments, feeling the rage build again. He had probably seduced Jessica without a second thought, not caring about the wreckage he'd leave behind. But I was going to make him care. Over the next few days, I stayed quiet. I didn't confront Jessica about what I knew, not yet. She was still reeling from our last conversation, tiptoeing around me, trying to make amends with half-hearted apologies and awkward silences. She had no idea that I was already working behind the scenes. I began compiling information on Brian, his clients, his work schedule, even the bars and restaurants he frequented. I wanted to know everything about him. I wanted to find the perfect way to tear his world apart. As the days passed, I became more distant from Jessica. I watched her closely, observed her every move. She was quieter now, her guilt eating away at her, but I didn't care. I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I wasn't interested in fixing what she had broken. All I wanted was to see her suffer, to watch her life crumble the same way she had destroyed mine. And then, the opportunity came. Through my digging, I found out that Brian was about to close on a major real estate deal, one that could bring in a significant commission for him. I wasn't exactly sure of the details, but it didn't matter. I had enough information to make his life difficult. I contacted one of the clients involved in the deal, pretending to be someone interested in buying the property. I didn't need much, just a few carefully placed lies, a few well-timed rumors to stir up trouble. It was enough to make the client second-guess working with Brian. The fallout was immediate. The deal collapsed, and I could practically hear the frustration through Brian's online rants. He lost a significant sum, and the whispers about his professionalism began to spread. But I wasn't done. I had more planned. Jessica was still walking on eggshells around me, trying to act as if everything was normal, but I could see the tension in her. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't quite figure out what. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the betrayal, the lies, the nights she had spent with him while I sat at home, believing in us. One night, when she was out again, I took it a step further. I logged into her email, something I had promised myself I'd never do, but nothing about this was normal anymore. I found messages between her and Brian, plans, meetups, even discussions about me. Reading their words made me feel sick. They had talked about me like I was some fool, someone to be kept in the dark while they had their fun. I forwarded those emails to Brian's colleagues. Every single one. I wanted his world to unravel, just like mine had. When Jessica came home that night, she found me sitting at the kitchen table, the weight of everything pressing down on us. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. I had already set the wheels in motion. She would soon find out just how far I was willing to go. And when it all came crashing down, when she realized the mess she had created, she would understand what it felt like to lose everything. The best part was that neither of them would see it coming. I sat there at the kitchen table, barely acknowledging Jessica as she walked in. She glanced at me, the tension in the air so thick you could almost touch it. But I remained quiet, letting her stew in her own discomfort. It was a game now, one where she had no idea she was about to lose everything. "Hey," she mumbled, dropping her purse on the counter and avoiding eye contact. She looked worn out, guilt pulling at her features. Good. I wanted her to feel like this, to suffer with the weight of her betrayal. I had waited patiently, knowing that the groundwork I'd laid was slowly closing in on her and her lover. "Hey," I replied, not even looking up from the papers I was pretending to read. I could feel her unease growing, her eyes darting nervously as if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It would. Soon. She made small talk, probably hoping to gauge my mood, to see if I had softened since the last time we'd really talked. But I was playing a different game now, one where my silence held more power than anything I could say. After a few awkward minutes, she sighed and went upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen. It was better that way. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until everything was perfectly in place. That night, as she slept beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with all the pieces of the puzzle I had set in motion. I had already taken away Brian's real estate deal, a crushing financial blow that was just the beginning. But there was more to come. Much more. Over the next week, I made it my mission to dig even deeper into Brian's life. I learned where he lived, his favorite hangouts, and, most importantly, his vulnerabilities. The more I uncovered, the clearer my plan became. I didn't just want to hurt him financially, I wanted to break him. To tear down the facade of his perfect life and leave him in ruins. And Jessica, well, she wasn't getting off easy either. It was a Tuesday when things really started to fall into place. I had been tracking Brian for days, following his every move from a distance, careful not to draw attention to myself. That afternoon, I followed him to a local bar, one he frequented after work. It was upscale, filled with suits and polished smiles, the kind of place he would feel right at home. But today, I was going to change that. I parked a few blocks away, walked into the bar, and found a corner table where I could watch him unnoticed. There he was, Brian Evans, sitting at the bar with that same arrogant grin, a drink in his hand. He looked relaxed, like someone who had no idea his life was about to implode. I watched as he flirted with the bartender, his confidence oozing from every word. He had no idea I was there. And he definitely had no idea what I had planned for him. As he sipped his drink, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the messages I had found between him and Jessica. They disgusted me, especially the way they talked about me, like I was some clueless idiot. It fueled my anger, solidifying my resolve to see this through. I composed an email, attaching the most damning messages, the ones where they mocked me, where they made plans to meet up in hotels, and sent it. Not to Brian. Not to Jessica. But to Brian's boss. I had learned from my research that Brian's boss was a family man, conservative, old-fashioned in his values. And from what I could gather, Brian's reputation at work was built on a clean, professional image. That image was about to be shattered. I hit send. Within minutes, I saw Brian's phone light up. He glanced at it, then at the second notification. His expression changed almost instantly, confusion, then panic. He opened his email, his face going pale as he read through the messages I had forwarded. I could see the realization washing over him, his arrogance crumbling as the weight of what I'd done started to hit him. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his drink, and rushed out of the bar, phone still in hand. I watched him go, a satisfied smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The cracks were starting to show. But I wasn't finished. Back home, Jessica was acting more tense than ever. She probably sensed that something was off, but she couldn't quite figure out what. I kept playing my role, detached, but not openly hostile. It was important that she felt comfortable enough to keep making her mistakes. I needed her to believe she still had control, that she could salvage what little remained of our marriage. One evening, while she was in the shower, I went back into her phone. It didn't take much to find what I was looking for, more messages, more lies. I found texts from her to Brian, filled with frantic apologies, begging him to talk to her. It seemed like my email had caused more chaos than I'd expected. And then, I found something else. Something that made my stomach turn. Jessica had been planning to leave me. Not in a year, not in a month. She had been making plans to walk away soon as she could line things up with Brian. There were texts between her and a divorce lawyer, emails discussing how she could position herself to take half of everything we owned. She had even started moving small amounts of money into a separate account, slowly siphoning funds from our joint savings. I felt a cold, sinking feeling in my chest as I realized just how far she was willing to go. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was plotting to take everything. Our home, our savings, our life. And that's when the anger shifted again, turning into something darker. She wanted out? Fine. I would give her an exit. But not the one she was expecting. That night, I stayed up late, making preparations. I transferred the majority of our joint savings into a new account, one she couldn't touch. I gathered every financial document I could find, making sure I had everything in place for what was to come. And then I started documenting everything. Her messages, her emails, her plans. I was building a case, not just against her, but against Brian too. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed. It was a Friday night when I finally decided to put the final piece of my plan into motion. I waited until Jessica was out again, probably with Brian, probably thinking she still had me fooled. I took my time, making sure everything was set up perfectly. When she came home that night, I was ready. She walked into the house, her face slightly flushed, probably from drinking. She gave me that same awkward smile she had been giving me for weeks now, the one that barely reached her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice light, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Hey," I replied, standing up from the table. This time, I wasn't going to let her walk away. "Sit down, Jessica," I said, my voice calm but firm. Her smile faltered. "Why? What's going on?" "Just sit down," I repeated, watching as confusion and fear flickered across her face. She slowly sat down, her eyes wide, sensing that something was very, very wrong. I pulled out my phone, the same one I had used to gather all the evidence, and placed it on the table between us. "We need to talk." Her face went pale as I started to explain. And that's when she realized she was about to lose everything. Jessica's face drained of color as I slid the phone across the table, her eyes darting nervously from me to the device as if it held a ticking bomb. In many ways, it did. The evidence I had collected was more than enough to detonate the fragile world she had tried so hard to hide from me. I felt a calm wash over me, the kind that comes right before a storm. I had the upper hand now. "Jack, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling as she shifted in her seat. I stared at her for a moment, letting the silence hang between us. The weight of the confrontation was suffocating, and I wanted her to feel every second of it. "Why don't you go ahead and unlock your phone?" I said, my tone measured, controlled. "I've already seen everything." Her hand froze halfway toward her phone, her expression a mixture of confusion and panic. "What are you talking about?" she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but the cracks were already forming. "Brian Evans," I said, watching her carefully. Her body tensed the moment his name left my mouth. She blinked, staring at me as though she had just been hit by a truck. That was all the confirmation I needed. "Jack, she started, but I cut her off before she could even try to spin a lie. "Stop." I leaned forward, my voice cold. "I know everything, Jessica. I know about Brian. I know about the texts, the late-night calls. I know about the hotels. Hell, I even know about the divorce lawyer you've been consulting behind my back." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage this, but there was no way out for her. "Not now." "You were planning to leave me," I continued, my voice low and sharp. "You were going to drain our accounts, take half of everything, and run off with him." "Jack, no, it's not like that." Her voice cracked, and I could see the panic setting in. "I wasn't going to." I mean, I didn't. Don't lie to me. I snapped, slamming my hand down on the table. She flinched, her eyes wide with fear. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let her get the better of me. Not after everything she had done. All this time, I said, my voice quieter now, but filled with venom, you've been sneaking around, treating me like a fool. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice what was happening right in front of me? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached across the table as if to touch my hand, but I pulled away, the disgust clear on my face. Jack, please. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I wasn't going to go through with it. I was confused, okay? Confused? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. You weren't confused, Jessica. You were planning this. Every step of the way, you were making choices. Choices that led to this. She wiped at her tears, her breathing shaky. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear. It started because I was lonely, and we weren't connecting anymore. I stared at her, my anger simmering just below the surface. The excuses, the justifications, none of it mattered anymore. She was trying to save herself, but she didn't realize how far gone we were. It's too late for that, I said flatly, standing up from the table. Do you know what I've done, Jessica? While you were off with Brian, making plans to tear apart everything we built together, I was making my own plans. Her eyes widened, panic rising in her chest. What do you mean? I stepped closer, watching as she shrank back in her chair. I've been preparing. I've moved the money out of our joint account. Everything we've saved over the years? Gone. You won't be able to touch a cent. Her face contorted in shock. What? You can't. I already have, I cut her off. And that's not all. I've got every email, every text, every little detail about your affair documented. I've sent it to Brian's boss. You know that big real estate deal he was working on? It's gone, Jessica. His reputation, his job, everything you thought you'd run off to with him, it's all crumbling. She gasped, tears streaming down her face now as she realized the full extent of what I had done. Jack, please. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'm sorry. I'll end things with Brian. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Make this right? Jessica, there's nothing left to fix. You destroyed us the moment you decided to sleep with him. Her sobs grew louder, her hands trembling as she tried to reach out for me again. Please, Jack. Don't leave me like this. I'll do anything, just, please. For a moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of lies, the nights she spent with him while I lay in bed, trusting her. I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. You want out, Jessica? I asked, my voice ice cold. Fine. I'm giving you exactly what you want. She stared at me, confused, desperate. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. You're going to pack your things and leave. You'll get your lawyer, and I'll get mine. But don't expect to walk away with half of what we've built. I've made sure you won't get much of anything. Jack, no, she cried, standing up now, her voice breaking as she rushed toward me. Please, we can work through this. We've been together for so long. Don't just throw it all away. I stepped back, keeping the distance between us. Jessica's words hung in the air, desperate and hollow, but I was already beyond caring. This was the end, the final nail in the coffin of everything we had built, everything I had once believed in. She had made her choices, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I looked at her, standing there in our kitchen, the same place we had shared so many memories, now reduced to nothing more than a battlefield. The woman in front of me wasn't the Jessica I had married. That Jessica was gone, replaced by someone who had betrayed everything we stood for. "You don't get to beg for forgiveness now," I said, my voice calm but edged with finality. "This isn't something we're going to work through. There's no coming back from this." Her face crumpled, her tears flowing freely as she tried to close the distance between us. "Jack, I made a mistake, but I can fix it. I'll end things with Brian, I swear. It didn't mean anything." "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "I don't want to hear it. You keep saying it didn't mean anything, but it meant enough for you to lie to my face for months. It meant enough for you to plan to leave me, to destroy our life for someone else. You don't get to downplay this now that it's all falling apart." Her shoulders shook with sobs, her mascara running down her face as she stood there, broken and lost. But the sight of her crying didn't move me. If anything, it only solidified my resolve. She wasn't crying for me or for what we had lost. She was crying because her plans had been blown up, and now she was standing in the ruins, realizing there was no escape. I walked past her, toward the door, feeling the weight of it all lifting as I made my decision. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. I was done with her lies, done with her manipulation. She could beg all she wanted, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice frantic as she followed me to the door, grabbing at my arm. I stopped, turning to face her one last time. "I told you, Jessica. I'm filing for divorce. You're going to pack your things and leave. This marriage is over." Her grip on my arm tightened, her nails digging into my skin as she shook her head, her eyes wide with desperation. "You can't just walk away. You can't do this." I pulled my arm free, stepping back as her face twisted in panic. "Watch me." She collapsed onto the floor, her sobs echoing through the house as I turned and walked out the front door. The night air hit me like a cold slap, but I welcomed it. I needed the clarity, the finality of being outside, away from her. I stood there on the porch for a moment, taking in the silence, feeling the weight of the last few weeks finally lifting from my chest. It wasn't over yet. The divorce would be messy, no doubt. There would be lawyers, there would be arguments, and there would be more lies from her as she tried to salvage what little she could. But I was ready for it. I had prepared for this moment, and now I was free. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, I thought about Brian. I hadn't heard from him since the fallout of the email I had sent to his boss, but I didn't need to. I knew that the damage had been done. His reputation was in shambles, his big real estate deal destroyed, and his professional life was on the brink of collapse. And that was only the beginning. He had no idea what else I had in store for him. In the days that followed, everything unfolded like I had planned. Jessica tried to reach out to me again and again, calling, texting, leaving tearful voicemails that I never responded to. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to beg for another chance, but I had made up my mind. Every time I saw her name flash on my phone, I felt nothing but anger and disgust. I deleted her messages without reading them. I filed for divorce the next day, just as I had told her I would. The papers were served to her at work, and from what I heard, she had broken down in front of her colleagues, humiliated and sobbing as she realized it was really happening. I didn't care. The woman who had betrayed me wasn't my problem anymore. Let her deal with the mess she had created. As for Brian, it didn't take long for word to get around about his affair with Jessica. The email I had sent to his boss was only the beginning. Soon, rumors spread through his professional network, and his name became synonymous with scandal and untrustworthiness. Clients dropped him, and his career took a nosedive. He tried to reach out to Jessica, but by then, she was too caught up in her own disaster to offer him any support. He was left alone to pick up the pieces of his shattered reputation. But I wasn't done with him. I knew where he lived, where he spent his time. And I made sure to plant seeds of doubt in his personal life, too. A few well-placed tips to his neighbors, whispers about his infidelities, and soon enough, his personal relationships were crumbling as well. I wanted him to feel the same isolation, the same betrayal, that I had felt. In the end, it all unraveled for both of them. Jessica lost more than she had ever imagined, and Brian's once promising career was in tatters. But most importantly, I was free of them. Free of their lies, their deceit, and the pain they had caused. The divorce took months to finalize, and by the time it was over, I had cut Jessica out of my life completely. She tried to reach out one last time, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, but I didn't even respond. There was nothing left to say. She was a ghost now, a reminder of the betrayal I had survived. As I stood on the porch of my new apartment, looking out at the city below, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine. I had survived the storm, and now I could rebuild, piece by piece, on my own terms. I walked back inside, closing the door behind me. The chapter with Jessica was over. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to move forward. Without her.